was so mad. I went to the store and they're like, oh no, if you didn't back all this stuff. Like 3 weeks later, they just showed up. Done. I have no idea. I didn't remember stuff. Never hurt the body at all.
There's one there on the wall.
Yeah, that's partially my fault. I'm supposed to schedule appointments and then I all of these are
Plug it up, you're just gonna have to face your face.
Well, you get to know who's gonna be a part of your community.
Now.
You guys just love to hang out here.
You know,
David,
everywhere.
you're gonna come for the whole meeting, huh? You're here for the whole meeting, huh?
It's a big man.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
Howdy, too.
Little old man.
Yeah.
Helps.
Maybe after the meeting. Depending on how
Out in the parking lot, singing and.
the jig.
Just in
Hello.
time.
Very good. Super good time. You just love this stuff, huh? You just love this stuff.
They're not chained to their desk. Down there in Monroe. It's a business center. Yeah. So that's why I smart.
I'm going to call the meeting of Tuesday, May 7th to order. I'd like to ask Mr. Guston to lead us in the pledge, please.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
That brings us to the public forum, which is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to the commission on matters that are not on
Chair Hardy?
tonight's agenda.
I believe it's roll call.
Oh, boy, I must be in a hurry to get out of here tonight. Ms. Gamero, would you please call the roll?
Sure. Commissioner Hale?
Here.
Vice Chair Pont?
Here.
Commissioner Anderson?
Here.
Commissioner Monette?
Here.
And Chair Hardy?
Here. Okay, public forum, take two. This is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to the commission on matters that are not on our agenda tonight. If you do have something to address, because it's not on the agenda, we will not be able to respond, but you're welcome to speak to us about any matter of concern. Is there anyone who would like to use the public forum? Seeing none, we'll close the public forum and move on. That brings us to the consent items. There is one, item 4.1, approval of the minutes of April 16th, 2019. Any member of the commission or of the public may ask that an item on consent be removed from consent for discussion. Is there anyone on the commission who would like to remove the minutes for discussion? Any member of the public would like them removed for discussion? Saying none, then, I would entertain a motion.
Move the minutes.
Second.
Ms. Gamero?
Vice Chair Pont?
Yes.
Commissioner Monette?
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
Commissioner Hale?
Yes.
Chair Hardy?
Yes. That brings us to the public hearings, and the first is item 5.1, a request by Gary Kohlsaat on behalf of Michael and Debbie Preston for approval of use permit and design review in order to construct a new single-family home and agricultural barn on the property located at 500 Mills Lane in the A20 zoning district. I believe, Mr. Hausch, that this is yours to present.
Thank you, Chair Hardy. I am filling in for Planner Heacock, so please bear with me. But the applicant is requesting a use permit and design review approval to construct a new about a 3,200 square foot single family home, including an attached garage and a about 1,100 square foot accessory dwelling unit, in addition to a approximately 3,000 square foot agricultural barn. This site, 500 Mills Lane, is about a 3 acre parcel, currently undeveloped and unplanted. The new home and ADU are designed in a modern farmhouse style, finished with a variety of materials, including board and batten siding, aluminum-clad windows, standing seam metal roof. The home is approximately 22 feet in height, and the proposed agricultural barn is proposed as stained pine siding, dark aluminum-clad windows, and corrugated metal roof as well. Staff identified that the project is exempt from the requirements of CEQA, pursuant to Section 15303, which exempts the new construction of small structures, including single-family residences and accessory structures. The general plan for the site designates the parcel as agriculture and identifies it as intended for agricultural uses, single-family residences, and public, quasi-public uses. It's worth noting that all lands outside the urban limit line, regardless of their development, are designated as agriculture, other than those identified as woodlands and watershed in the general plan. Staff report identifies a number of general plan policies, which staff has identified as applicable to the project and found the project consistent with these policies. The zoning for the site is consistent with the ag designation and is A20, similarly providing for agricultural and residential uses. The standards in the A20 district identify that there's a maximum non-agricultural coverage of 1 acre. There is no floor area ratio. Building heights are limited to 30 feet, and there's significant front setback of 50 feet and 20-foot side and rear setbacks. It's worth noting that there is an exhibit provided that identifies the amount of non-agricultural area proposed to be developed with the site. However, areas that are included in the in the agricultural calculation are actually planted with Chinese pistache and a number of ground cover plants which would not qualify as agricultural uses. However, in reviewing the scope and size of that exhibit, the design of the project still would remain significantly under the maximum 1 acre allowed non-agricultural planted area or used area, and staff will seek to tighten up our review of those graphics in the future, but it's worth noting. Staff has identified that the project meets all development standards as required. It's worth noting that the barn identifies a cupola that's projecting above the maximum height. There's a zoning code section that allows height limitations of not more than 5 feet for cupolas or other roof structures, essentially to accommodate ventilation or mechanical equipment, etc. And this is a ventilation cupola, so just worth noting, but it does meet the requirements of the zoning code. This design, as a new home, the project will be subject to the growth management limitations that St. Helena has. We only allow a maximum of 9 new residential units, market rate residential units, to be constructed per year, and this will be identified as, or will have to comply with one of those, or with that limitation. Excuse me.
What is the number right now?
I do not have that number in front of me, and granting the approval today does not guarantee that the allotment will come from the 2019 allotments. If they were to pull their building permit in 2020, it would come from the 2020 allotments. Growth management is tied to the building permit issuance, so staff tends to identify and track the growth management allocations as they come through the discretionary process to kind of predict or try to anticipate when they will be pulling building permits, and then when they would be subject to the allotments of the current year of the discretionary approval or a future year.
Well, then if this happens to be number 10, then you will require that they pull their permits in 2020? Is
Correct.
that- Okay.
Yeah, and this is not, we are not even close to that
I
limitation.
didn't think so.
Yeah.
But
But no, that's excellent point, and that's correct. If this were to be number 10, it would be conditioned to not be able to pull a building permit until 2020. It's also worth noting the project proposes to rely purely on well water, and so there is no water neutrality analysis brought in as a part of this review. And then finally, agricultural structures and the proposal to put plumbing into an accessory structure required use permit approval, and that's why we are here with the use permit in addition to design review. Staff did receive one comment letter after sending out a notice of application on June 12th to all the surrounding residential and commercial properties, and that comment letter was generally supportive of the project. And it's included in the packet for Planning Commission to review. With that, staff concludes our presentation, and we are happy to answer any questions. The project property owner is here as well, if there are any questions of the owner.
Any questions for staff?
I have one too. Yeah.
I've got a couple. Thank you, by the way, for catching those non-agricultural areas on the A16. Are you requesting a redraw of A16 by any slight chance?
Staff has not identified that as necessary. However, the commission would like that to come in as a part of the building permit package. That absolutely can be conditioned.
I'm just thinking because undoubtedly the owner is not going to own this forever. So the next person comes in and checks on the permit, and it says, that's all agricultural. I get to go beyond that. So just for clarity's sake, I'd like to have, and the commission may or may not consider this, I'd like to have an accurate drawing of what's where to start with. So as time goes on, as somebody approaches the acre, we know they're approaching the acre, rather than they shot through it and kept on going because this wasn't relabeled sometime in the past.
That's actually an excellent point and could be a condition on all projects in the 820 zoning district to provide that exhibit with their building permit to address the concern you just identified.
Could you please explain it? I don't quite understand what you're
Okay,
saying.
right now we've got a drawing, A16. Could you put up A16, please?
I can find it on the last one.
That's the landscaping drawings, one of them. Yeah.
What page is it?
It was a late submission. It may.
Well, it's just A16 though. That's what it says.
Yeah.
I can find it. Yeah, I
Yeah,
can
so
read
basically
It's
numbers.
the first drawing.
Page 50?
Yeah, 50.
It's not
Oh,
the big page?
okay.
No.
Well, A16, okay.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
A16 identifies the agricultural and non-agricultural areas for this project, right? And they do a set of calculations. If some of the, to see how short they are of the acre, right?
Right.
Well, a couple of these areas that are marked as agricultural are not, they're strictly done for looks, right? Chinese pistache trees do not produce pistachios, okay? So if we show the wrong number on this plot, and the next person comes in 20 years from now, 15 years from now, whatever, and says, well, I still have 4/10 of an acre to go. They don't really have 4/10 of an acre to go. They've got like 3/10 of an acre to go.
Where are the wrong numbers? I guess there are wrong numbers here. I didn't-
To do that, you have to compare A16 to L1 and L2.
Okay.
This area is identified as fruit tree plantings in the agricultural exhibit, but if you look on the site plan, or the landscape plan, it's identified as Chinese pistache.
Oh,
Yeah.
Well, while we're on that subject, just for efficiency's sake, I see, Director Hausch, that the barn is designated non-agricultural, which makes some sense to me. It's a barn big enough for a couple hundred acres, and there are only 3 here, really. But we've also then got an agricultural use access road that,
Doesn't actually
so
access
far
the
as I
barn.
can see, serves the barn.
It's worth noting that the barn is specifically being requested as an agricultural barn, and they filed the use permit in order to request that. So it is identified as such in the
which
project
means what?
submittal and project description.
As opposed to what kind of barn?
Well, the barn could be accessory to the residence, but then I'm completely confused both by the submittal and mystified by the proposed use of the barn. It's a
Perhaps
fraction of that size would serve the agricultural area on this property.
so the property owners here, they may be able to shed some light if you have any
Well,
questions.
We'll,
but-
we'll ask that question then when
Okay.
when the applicant presents.
I'd want to suggest that you read 172060C1. Yeah, it has 2 definitions in it of coverage. And one of them reads, all structures, driveways, except for a 16-foot wide driveway no greater than 2/3 length of the parcel, parking, patios, lawn, or other non-agricultural uses shall be limited to the 1 acre minimum parcel. So I think this would count under all structures, even if it is a used barn. And
Yeah.
that does bring up my...
Yeah, you know, we've talked about that before,
Yeah.
that confusion. I
That does
remember.
bring up my second question. Except for a 16-foot driveway, no greater than 2/3 length of the parcel. We've got a 16-foot driveway, but at its end, it widens out to a pad almost 70 feet across that is still all backed out of. It seems to me that part of that should be in the calculation for non-agricultural, that part that is wider than 16 feet.
It's not?
The hammerhead?
Yeah,
It's not?
yeah. Well, it is included. It's exempt. The way this thing reads to me, they exempt everything, anything that's 16 feet wide up to 2/3, a driveway, up to 2/3 length of the parcel, 16 feet
We had the
wide.
same issue on the last.
We had the same issue on, but this
person.
one I think is more clear.
Did you
There
exempt
is
it?
no exemption in that exemption for fire access.
Oh.
It simply says 16 feet
Yeah,
wide,
it should be.
2/3 the length of the parcel, period.
I agree.
It doesn't say you get exempt for fire access, or that may be something that we suggest to change in the future, but right now it doesn't seem to be. They're still going to be well under, but since we're talking about process and getting this correct,
For the future, especially, yeah.
Well, for the record, post-approval, yes. I mean, I think John's absolutely right. It's very important to get the graphic and the related table correct so that down the road, the record
speak.
provides an accurate starting point for anyone looking at expansion of the developed area.
And those were basically my two questions, although the director picked up on that non-agricultural plantings.
Right. Commissioner Manette?
Yeah, I was wondering, is the pool, I know that they're not on city water, however, the aquifer is also our water. So will the same rules about trucking in water for the pool apply? And if not, why not? And can we make that a condition?
I don't believe that they would apply, and I'm not certain we could condition it, given that it's not a municipal water source that we can control.
Well, we could control it.
I don't believe we have the rights to.
Really? The aquifer is not considered?
Not by the city. The city does not regulate groundwater. That's the state and the county who are involved in regulation.
We have no,
But you now need a city permit to drill a well, correct?
A new well, that's correct. There's an
Okay.
existing well serving this
Existing
site.
well, okay, that they won't have to re-drill or make any larger? Okay.
It has not been identified as such to me. My knowledge is relatively limited.
well, do you know, and I've forgotten, I know there was some, maybe it's just for the county, but are there some requirements now that all wells be metered and now and monitored, or is that not the case?
Just given that we don't, as a city, we don't regulate wells significantly, I don't have firsthand knowledge. I am aware of what you're talking about. I just do not have firsthand knowledge of if that regulation passed, if the county's requiring it, what all, because it came out of the state, and what all of the requirements are for that. I'm not in a position to answer that
Can
question.
you find out, or should I find out, or what?
If you'd like me to try to research that, I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, I'll help.
Yeah, I mean, that's a question of sort of what the current state of the county's groundwater management plan is.
That's correct.
I know that the county is requiring data logging for wells in connection with conditional use permits, typically wineries. I don't
Right.
know that the requirement has gone any further than that yet.
The county environmental health department regulates wells, and so just because we generally regulate city municipal water, I don't have
They-
firsthand knowledge.
They regulate water quality, and they regulate the issuance of well permits, but they don't regulate the use of water.
Who does?
To the extent that anyone locally does, it would be the county through the groundwater management plan. Otherwise, there's a private right to reasonable use of groundwater, which is in effect held in trust by the state of California for the benefit of all the people.
Right,
Legally, it's pretty esoteric, but
okay.
as a practical matter, groundwater has been the least regulated source of water in California for.
Starting to change, though, I think.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. But those changes aren't very much in process and far from complete.
I had another question that might be better answered by the owner, but I believe that I went by there, I go by there a lot. There's a whole bunch of persimmon trees in the front. Are those going to be torn out?
Let's
Yay!
wait.
Okay, I
If
didn't
we
know.
can.
Okay,
Thank
okay,
you.
I didn't know if that was your question or their question.
We're very much up for saving those.
Okay.
Please, we need to have the exchange on record if possible, so that's why I asked to wait.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Commissioner Anderson.
The only thing that I had noticed was I got logged out of my agenda. In a letter from the architect, it said the barn was going to be used for winemaking, and I just wanted to verify that that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
Thank you for pointing that out. I meant to bring it up. I briefly had a chance to chat with the owner. That's intended for personal winemaking, and we absolutely can and should condition it that no commercial winery activity can occur on the site without future approvals.
Commissioner Hale?
I have no questions.
If I could, one more thing. Can we condition this such that it's clear that they're at X acreage being converted and any conversion beyond the 1 acre? I know it says all city codes, but I'd like to pull this out in particular because it only applies in the A20 district. So.
Absolutely, the commission could condition that. I would recommend the condition reference an updated graphic accurately identifying all ag and not and specifying the acreage.
Thank you.
With that done, then I'd like to open the public hearing and invite the applicant or the applicant's representative to present the project, please.
Hello, I'm Mike Preston, my wife Debbie, and we are the owners of the property and hopeful participants in building something here in St. Helena.
Have you owned the property for a long time? Or?
No, we've owned it for about a year and a half,
Okay.
I think.
Okay.
About a year and a half.
Okay, the history of my personal history with the persimmons predates your ownership.
Yes, it does. There was someone that we purchased it off of that I think had owned it for 50 or 60 years prior, and he sort of aged out on wanting to take care of the property. And my son-in-law owns the 6 acres right next door to the west, and so we wanted to barge in on our family members and buy the property next door.
Are they here?
So the persimmons are going to stay. We plan to remove 2 or 3 of the trees right where the main center drive is in. That agricultural drive, or whatever you want to call it, on the, what is that, the east side? That's an existing dirt road that's there that's been used for years, and it's used by the Molinari family right next door to us. We sort of share it and let them use it as kind of a common friendship thing. It's narrow little dirt road. The fire department requires the turnaround on the end and all that paved area. That was all fire department requirement. Swimming pool, you mentioned that. Swimming pool was put in because of the fire department wanting a water source, and they said we had the chance to either put in a 50,000 gallon tank or a swimming pool. We thought the swimming pool would look a lot better than a 50,000 gallon tank. I would assume you would share that sentiment. But, so
It's not an unusual choice.
It might be more fun to swim in a 50,000 gallon tank. I don't know.
could be. Probably stay cooler.
Would they require you to have a 3-inch pump available too?
There is some significant pumps, yes. So there's actually there's a draw system that comes from the bottom of the swimming pool up, and a fire hydrant that gets put over by one of those paved areas so that they can pull the truck up and in there, suck the water out from the swimming pool. It's called a wharf hydrant. A wharf hydrant. So it takes pressure to suck it out. You have to suck the water out of the pool, which is what the fire trucks are set up to do.
So what do you intend to use the barn for?
Playing. The whole place is for playing. No, we want to put we'd like to dink around and try to make some wine. We have 2.5 acres or just about 2.5 acres of vineyard on a 3-acre site. I think we're using, I don't know, half to 3/4 of it for the property, for the development. So we'd like to be able to try that. We'd like to store some toys in there and just have a barn. It's a kit barn that we're purchasing, and it was kind of that size, and so we thought it would look good on the property.
Was that
trying to do a quality project there.
Was it that one built in Vallejo on Mare Island? Is that the...
Yeah, well, they do that there now, but no, this one is actually I believe Iowa or somewhere in Iowa, somewhere in the Midwest.
No, I'm not finished, Bobby. So I'd just like to sort of carry out the conversation about the barn. One of the reasons that I'm asking about the intended use of the barn is that building code requirements are actually based on classification of use. So if you say it's for storage, you've got one set of code requirements, but if you actually intend to use it for entertainment, for example, then that would be a different set of building code requirements, and use of the structure that you've constructed pursuant to a storage designation for entertainment would be a violation of the building code. So just seeing how large it is in relation to the agricultural area on the parcel convinced me that there must be something more intended than the winemaking, et cetera, because it's
No, we'd like to be
way
able to
bigger
store
than the
tractors or whatever the heck that we're using to, to take care of the vineyard. We're supposed to be planting the vineyard in June. We actually bought the vines last year. And so, we want to store some of the agricultural equipment in there, and we want to make wine in there.
Well, and from a zoning perspective, given the rather limited area of development on the site in relation to the code, it doesn't really matter zoning-wise whether the use is accessory to the residence or accessory to agriculture. But it may matter for building code purposes. So I'm just encouraging you to be clear about the use when you file your building plan so that you don't end up with conflict between what you're doing in the building and what it's permitted for pursuant to the building code, which is a whole separate thing that no one should ever have to read.
Right.
I'm still recovering from having to do that a few years back on a matter I was working on, and it's no. Just let your architect explain what you need to do.
No, noted. I don't know that we've thought out every use for the house and every room in the house and every piece of the barn. I think we're just trying to build a product that looks really nice and has, the potential for, adequate use and for on a 3-acre parcel. And so to me, it doesn't seem excessive in any way, shape, or form. I mean, I see, a lot bigger stuff than that in Silicon Valley on a lot smaller lots, and I'm not sure. That doesn't seem excessive, but your point is noted. We'll make sure that we're clear going into the building department what our use is.
Thank you.
And the fire department has already required us to have industrial fire sprinklers in it. So no matter what the use is, they've got the industrial fire sprinklers, which means all iron pipe and pressure pumps and everything else under the sun. This has not been an easy process getting to this point, by the way.
Yeah, I'm not sure the building code would support that for an agricultural use, but I'm going to stay out of that one. Is there anyone else on the commission with a question for the applicant? If not, thank you.
We good?
We'll see.
Whatever
So
he says.
far, so good.
Okay. Thank you.
The public hearing is still open. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on this project? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Fellow commissioners, your thoughts, comments?
I think it's a handsome-looking project. It fits within our parameters with a couple little tweaks on a couple sheets and a small change to the resolution. I would say we're done.
Thank you, Commissioner Pott. Anyone else? Commissioner Manette?
Yeah, none of the neighbors seem to mind, and that's always important to me. Or if they do, they aren't saying for political reasons. But as long as I'm pleased that the persimmon trees will stay there, and maybe I'll talk to you about that someday. But I go by there a lot. I'm assuming that the people walk next to the property, and I'm hoping that will remain the case. And I think it's a great project, and nobody's objecting who lives near it, so I wish you well with it, and I'm okay with it.
Just one quick thing. The back to this 2/3, 16-foot wide piece. If we're gonna, just this kind of a general question out there. Do we? I know that when we consider that, we kind of eyeball it. I would probably suggest in the future that they calculate, because it's going to be different per parcel if you take in a 16-foot wide swath, and I think it might simplify things if you just gave an allowance there, like this parcel is allowed to be 16 feet wide, 2/3 as an allowance, it just lines up with
It
code.
reads that way.
Well, it just, the code says you're allowed to have a 16-foot driveway 2/3 of the length of the property that's exempt. So I'm just throwing a general question out there, whether that, if we're going to talk about giving or locking in a certain square footage on this lot.
Well, I think what we're talking about is
should-
locking in the non-exempt area.
Staff was anticipating that the exhibit would be modified to capture areas currently identified as ag, as non-ag, give that total square footage as it's proposed. Future development would recalculate and
Right.
address that.
Yeah. In my view, future development has to meet code also. Or, no more or less. You kind of recalculate when you apply for something else. You have to prove facts on the ground and what you're doing. So I don't see that as a big.
You really wouldn't have to apply. It would just be, let's say you want to tear out a bunch of this and put in a pitch and putt, right? That's not something you'd come here for a permit for, but it would be illegal
If it exceeded.
because it would exceed the acre.
Right, but.
So that's not something you'd be back here for.
Right,
I want this
in any case.
we want this included in the resolution.
I don't think we should weigh in on future scofflawism. Or if somebody does something, I don't think we should assume that they're going to do something wrong.
It's identifying to future owners that this would be part of, I don't know about you, but when I buy a house, I look what permit's been pulled on it to see what's, right? And if somebody's going to buy a parcel for this, I think their due diligence, they would go ahead and pull the permits and see what's allowed. That way it's crystal clear, without reading the code, that you can't put a pitch and putt on this. Well, you could, it'd be
What's a
tiny, but
pitch
you
and
could.
putt?
I think just the point is that currently this area on the exhibit identifies agricultural use fruit trees, and that's not consistent with the proposed landscape plan. So the condition as staff's reading is to update the exhibit to be accurate.
That I get. I don't.
And I'm with John. I don't think the fire department hammerhead that's there in order to serve fire protection of the residents is part of an exempt driveway. So, the graphic doesn't make that distinction, and I think it needs to be made as well.
Why wouldn't it be? What is your reasoning? It's required. There's no choice. Just like the 15-foot road, there's no choice. It's required. Why would that part of the requirement be exempt?
Because our code doesn't call it out.
Yeah.
Because
Oh.
our
The
code
code's
doesn't
for the-
exempt it. It's the way the code reads, literally.
We could amend the code, but as the code reads, it's for a 16-foot driveway of up to a maximum length of 2/3 the length of the parcel.
Couldn't we also, though, in keeping with the intent of the code, if we can assume that would include anything that was required by the fire department for.
The intent of the whole limitation is to minimize or at least limit, in some sense minimize, the area of land that's taken out of agricultural use.
Right.
So from my perspective, the appropriate way to apply that intent to interpretation of the ordinance is to apply it strictly.
Well, my sense is the intent of the ordinance is also to allow appropriate fire access, in that the turnaround area would be part of it. But
Well,
that's
I'm not
what's
saying it's
behind-
prohibited. I'm just saying it counts as developed area.
Right, but I can certainly see an argument that it would fall into the same category as per intention, that the hammerhead end of it was part of what was being required, what was motivated by the same thing that required the 15-foot driveway, and that I could certainly buy that interpretation, but
So it's worth noting that the Planning Commission will have an opportunity to comment on every element of the zoning code when we bring forward the comprehensive zoning code update after adoption of the general plan. And this will be a topic of discussion, I can tell.
again, I forgot one thing. Oh, were you finished?
Yeah.
You're not finished?
No, I'm.
Oh, you're finished. I also wanted to. I really like this project, but I want the language that was suggested by Amber about that you suggested in response to what she was saying about limiting future winery production. So I hope it. Future expanded winery, you know.
So what is then, Director Hausch, the staff's approach to analysis of the turnaround?
Well, based on the past two, the previous item, which was very similar in that there was comments and concerns from the commission regarding fire department access roads, and this discussion, staff would use a strict interpretation identifying anything beyond a 16-foot access road, 2/3 the length of the parcel, as being subject to the limitation of 1 acre. And looking at this, just to further nuance it, it seems like a 16-foot wide portion of that turnaround may be extended based on the 2/3 requirement. We didn't ask for that level of detail, given that the overall parcel or overall non-ag uses were substantially under the 1 acre, and so frankly, staff didn't tangle with getting that nuance because of the basically the capacity of non-ag.
That works for me.
But that's how we would do it based on the direction from the commission until we have a future zoning code update, or potentially this could be one of the official zoning code interpretations that gets formalized to clarify that.
In the meanwhile.
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
That's fine with me too.
Any other comments or discussion points on the commission? Is there someone prepared to make a motion?
I would like to move that we, A, determine the project is exempt from CEQA, B, accept the findings and approve a resolution as modified, granting the use permit and design review approval for the project.
I'll just pause to confirm with Director Hausch that he has a clear sense of the modifications that we've discussed.
Add a condition identifying that the building permit plan set must provide an updated agricultural land exhibit to clearly identify the total non-agricultural acreage, and to specify that no commercial winemaking activity is permitted to occur in the barn.
And to identify in the resolution about the agricultural, non-agricultural split. Okay.
Is there a second? I'll open the public hearing for you. Please come to the microphone. Public hearing is open.
Preston again. I'm just confused over all that discussion. I'm not sure I was following it, but we're within the allowed area to build what we're building,
yes.
right? Including our road and our turnaround and
Yes.
our everything, our
Yes.
barn, and
Yes.
so I'm not quite sure why all the discussion. I'm not sure if that
Well,
was just
wait,
trying to amend
Well-
for future design or
To make an accurate record for the future.
for that, just the tree planting in that one area is really about it, right?
And those portions of the fire department requirement for a turnaround that exceed the 16-foot width that's exempt.
Okay, but isn't that
You're-
development allowable anyway, that wider?
Well, it's all a question of whether it counts towards the 1 acre, not whether it's allowable.
Okay, you're just
And
not
you're-
sure.
you're
I'm
not-
trying to understand what you guys want, so we make sure we do it, right?
Well,
So-
the site plan is fine.
Right,
We're not asking for any changes in the site plan.
okay,
We're approving that site plan.
right,
We're directing Director Hausch to correct the calculation of developed area as it counts towards the 1 acre so that the record is accurate at the time you develop the property you've proposed.
okay. I mean, because my assumption is that that paved area is already in the, whatever, non-agriculture piece of it or what, but you're saying that says differently? Okay, okay, that I understand.
Yeah,
I just, I
you'll
was,
still be well under the
I
limit.
was unclear.
We're just tagging the stuff that is non-agricultural by the code as such on your drawing. So the next person comes along and says, see, I'm at, instead of, what do you, instead of at, what, 0.445 acres, he's at 0.52 acres.
Okay,
So he
I
can't
hear-
put
yeah,
a
and I
pitch
hear
and
that
putt.
part.
He can't put a pitch and putt in. It's just going to be smaller than he wants.
right. Or
Bottom line.
has to pitch and putt around the vineyard.
Yeah,
All
or
right,
just, the whole idea is to protect agricultural lands here in the valley. As you well know, you can dig anywhere and plant a grapevine and make lots of money. It's valuable as ag land, so we want to preserve it as ag land. That's why the 1 acre.
absolutely appreciate that, for sure, for sure. Okay, that's great. And the other one is, I didn't, in the motion, I didn't know if I heard approval for the use permit. Was that in that motion for the restrooms? And okay, excellent. I think that's all I have. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I'll leave the public hearing open if there's anyone else who wants to speak. Seeing none. It's closed. We have a motion, but not yet a second.
Second.
Now we've got a motion and a second. Ms. Guerrero?
Vice Chair Pont?
Yes.
Commissioner Monette?
Yes.
Commissioner Hale?
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
Chair Hardy?
Yes. That brings us to item 5.2. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a request for a design review for the rehabilitation and minor alterations to portions of the interior and exterior of an existing historic building that includes removing 70 square feet of interior floor area and adding 70 square foot on the downstairs for next to the kitchen, and the construction of a new 400 square foot garage. It also includes approval of a demolition permit to remove 200 square feet of non-historic construction that was added to the existing accessory dwelling unit. The main residence is listed on the Napa County Historic Resource Inventory and the 2012 Office of Historic Preservation Historic Properties Directory. Attached to the staff report was a historical assessment prepared by, and I'm going to butcher this, Evans and DeShazo. The original residence was apparently constructed around 1890, and over time there'd been minor additions and alterations, still maintaining the integrity of the original Queen Anne architectural, but some non-historic elements had been added, and at some point there was additional square footage added to the accessory dwelling unit that is part of the request for the demolition permit. We'll get more on this later, but the existing primary residence contains about 4,350 square feet, where the current maximum allowable standard for that zoning district is 4,200 square feet, which makes the building a legal non-conforming structure. There are provisions in the zoning code that says the legal non-conforming status can be maintained so long as it's not increased. So we'll talk about that more in a few minutes. As I noted, 70 square feet is proposed to be removed from the turret area on the second floor, and that will be used to offset the 70 square foot addition on the ground floor for the addition of a breakfast nook. There will also be some non-historic elements such as the heating, ventilating, and air conditioning chase will be removed. Part of the dormer roof will be removed, and the non-historic windows that had been added over time will be replaced with items that are more period correct. In all, the building will maintain the same square footage that it has today, using nuances of the zoning code to make that addition happen by the deletion of the 70 square feet. As we noted, there's also a request for a demolition permit to remove approximately 200 square foot of the accessory dwelling unit. That's the single-story appendage that is in very sad state of repair at this point in time. So I don't think there's going to be any tears shed for having that come down and restore the integrity of the original barn building.
The pictures may look like real hell.
Excuse me?
The pictures make it look like it's falling apart.
Take a walk by. The garage that's being proposed is 400 square feet, two-car garage. As viewed from Oak Street, will have custom-built carriage doors, gable dormers and vents, and board and batting siding. There'll be a door on the side for access to the main residence, and there'll be no windows in the building. So the main issues that staff has addressed are the floor area ratio and lot coverage. It's a lot of moving targets here, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask, and we'll do our best to answer them. The existing lot contains 18,986 square feet. The minimum size in the medium residential district is 7,000 square feet, so it's a lot larger than normal. But the same lot standards apply whether it's 7,000 square feet or greater, and that is a 45% lot coverage and a maximum of 4,200 square feet of gross floor area for all structures, and a floor area ratio of 22%. As we've noted, there's not going to be an increase in the total square footage when you look at all the exemptions allowed by the code, and the total floor area ratio will actually be reduced about 2.3%, I believe, but it will still be above that allowed. So there's a lot of moving targets, and we tried to make all of them clear in the staff report, so it can be confusing. We've gotten one piece of correspondence since the publication of the staff report, and that was from the adjoining property owner to the south, and he had requested a fence along the property line between their properties along the alley. And it's my understanding that the applicant's representative is making efforts to get that resolved, and that's something that is a ministerial project as a part of the building permit process. So we wouldn't really have any involvement in that, but it's my understanding that the applicant has agreed to do whatever he has to do to make people happy. So with that, that concludes our presentation. The options available to the Planning Commission is to approve, modify, deny, or continue the public hearing to get more information. We've provided findings and conditions for approval, but it's up to the Planning Commission. It's within their discretion to do any of the changes that they may wish. Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Guston. Any questions for Mr. Guston from the Commission?
Well, I had a question. I think you answered it because it's, 496 square feet more than it was, but you said there are additional exemptions, so
That's correct.
Okay.
For the 400 square feet for the accessory dwelling unit and a 200 square foot exemption for the garage.
Any other questions?
I'm not really clear on taking away the 70 square feet in the turret and adding it to the first floor. The removal of the 70 square feet in the turret doesn't change its visible appearance, but adding the breakfast nook does, and that seems like it would push it it would increase the nonconformity.
It would appear that way, but if you look at a strict interpretation of the language, they're removing 70 square feet of interior floor area and then adding that 70 square feet as exterior floor area. So on numbers alone, it's a wash. But yes, you're absolutely correct. It will change the physical appearance of the building. Technically, the floor area ratio is being decreased. The lot coverage is being increased. But the primary concern in this area is the floor area ratio, and effectively, they are over the existing floor area standard. They're reducing it by 2.3%, I believe, but they're still going to be over. The lot coverage will increase, but they're significantly below that which is allowed. And if that makes sense to you, then please explain it to me. It's confusing.
You mean it's below that which is allowed as a non-conforming lot?
No, it's by zoning code. It's
Okay.
below. The floor area ratio and the lot coverage are two unique animals that really don't have any relationship to each other. They're just both standards. And what you try to do is get as close to them as you can, staying below them. But when you're dealing with existing structures that were built in 1890 and a zoning code that has evolved over time, it creates headaches down the road, and that's where we are today. But effectively, they're reducing the floor area ratio, but still will be above the standard that's currently in place.
Right. So if I can, Chris, let me see if I can get this right. So the size of the house doesn't change, literally.
As defined in the current zoning code.
Correct. The ADU gets reduced by 200 square feet.
An exemption for it, yes.
No, I mean it gets reduced by two. They're knocking off a couple hundred square feet.
The
I'm not
appendix,
talking.
I know, the
I'm not talking
appendix,
about the
yes.
exemption.
I understand.
Okay.
Now I understand.
They knock off 200 feet. They add 400 feet of garage. Okay. So we're actually adding 200 square feet. But because of the 400 square foot exemption for the ADU and the 200 square foot exemption for the garage, we actually come out where we were before. It's a wash.
Essentially, yes.
Okay. The benefits we're getting out of this in terms of this project coming into conformance are then the creation of the garage, right? Because we require garages or covered carports. So that's one benefit. A second benefit is the reduction of the non-standard setback for the ADU since we're chopping off 200 square feet of it. So we lose that 15 or 20 feet that was too close. The rest of the ADU is still too close. In fact, it's right on the property line, correct?
Mm-hmm.
But we gain that. So we got two benefits here, which is the garage and the less non-conforming setback for the ADU. Otherwise, Zippo. That's how I read this. Is that more or less correct?
Staff would add the benefit of a more period-appropriate historic home in the Oak Avenue Historic District.
Yeah, I mean it's a well done piece of work. In fact, the added breakfast nook, if you look at it architecturally, mirrors the rest of the building. So you could see that as maybe a benefit. It certainly doesn't hurt anything. But in terms of our zoning code, we get the two things. So that as somebody put it, the ball is moving down the field. It's just not moving down the field really fast. Okay. 2 yards in a cloud of dust.
Well, I'm going to come in with what's, I'm sure, more of a comment than a question, but I've been thinking about the concern that Autumn's raised about using deletion of floor in the second story in order to create room within the code for an expansion of the ground floor. I don't have any qualms about the application of, or the effect of strictly applying the development standard as it's written in this instance, but it does seem to me to point to a real flaw potentially, depending on how one thinks about it, in the way in which the floor area ratio regulation is written, in that, at least as I understand it, the fundamental purpose of counting the second story floor area is so that when a residence goes up, its footprint shrinks. And here we have an instance that demonstrates how, at least, I'm sure this could be done with new construction actually as well, and maybe it already has, and we just haven't thought about it because it wasn't a change like this that called the subject to our attention. But the use of a very tall, two-story tall first story then seems to in some manner defeat the purpose of having the floor area ratio defined the way it is. So I think that's worth flagging for some pretty serious discussion. I mean, there are other things about this project that sort of take me in a different direction. I look at the way all of this lays out on the property, and it seems to me that the net effect is actually fairly constrained because it's a very large parcel. And it seems to me that the footprint of this structure could be significantly bigger without feeling oversized for the lot. I think it's a good one to sort of file away mentally for use as an example when we're reviewing the FAR section of the zoning code. I'm not sure that, well, I'll back up a second. The absolutely most brilliant professor I had in law school said, and this is reminding me of it, he said that every rule that gets written will both over-regulate and under-regulate. You'll always sweep some things in that really aren't what you intended to catch, and you'll always miss some things that you did. So perfection is not a useful target, really, but I think we can do better. And that's not a criticism of this project at all. I like the project, but I'm always mindful of circumstances that call our attention to things in the code that are worth some further scrutiny. So that's my contribution for the moment. Are there any other questions for staff before I open the public hearing? Seeing none, the public hearing is open, and I will invite the applicant or the applicant's representative to speak. Thank you.
Good evening. How are you? I'm Maury Blackman. This is my wife, Leslie. We bought the home in 2015 with the intent to do pretty much what has been identified here, to basically modernize the home and restore it to its historic quality, to really bring it back up to where we felt it should be. We looked at a lot of homes here in St. Helena that we liked, and we're very drawn towards Victorians, and we wanted to buy this home and basically bring it back to where we truly think it probably was back in the early 1900s, with a few modern touches, like a refrigerator and a stove, and fun stuff like that. That's right. Just a couple more little personal things about us. We have 2 children. One is in New York. One is about to graduate. When we bought the house, we thought, well, we've got plenty of time to get the planning going and get it fixed up so that when our youngest graduates, we can move up here, which we're still excited to do. It just took a lot longer than we thought. We hired a great team of local architects and project managers and a contractor to do this project. I mean, John Lale's here with us today. We've been working with John since when we envisioned buying the house, we sat down with John to try to think through if we could get the house to where we really wanted it. I noted your kind of the challenges you were having with kind of what's gone on with the upstairs, And, you know, from our perspective, when we bought the home, there's been a lot of work done that wasn't very thoughtful. And, you know, just walls going up inside, and it just didn't really match up. And so the addition of the kitchen nook is, you know, part of the bigger plan to just provide a very beautiful appearance for the home that's balanced, you know, across the board. Look forward to any questions you might have.
Commissioner Hale?
I don't have any questions.
Thank you.
Commissioner Pott?
No questions. Looks like you're doing the right thing.
Thank you.
Commissioner Monette?
No, just when do you think you'll move in?
Well,
I mean, you don't have to.
yeah, well, what we're hoping to do is get the accessory structure completed quickly so that we can move in, because I think we've remodeled a couple homes already, and one thing that we know is that we'd like to be here to observe the work. And it's a great place. I mean, look at this. I love to cycle. We love to drink wine and eat nice dinners, and you know, so we're super excited about being here.
You guys must have been.
We must have been
teen parents.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Commissioner Anderson?
Would you consider moving the breakfast nook within the existing floor space of the first floor?
Well, I felt like that, you know, when we looked at the design, you notice the breakfast nook balances out with the pop out that's already there. And so that was one of the things that we were trying to achieve. And, you know, we spent a lot of time planning it. And, you know, from my standpoint, the way I spent a lot of time in the house just kind of walking around and kind of visualizing how we would enjoy the different rooms. And one of the reasons, even though it's 70 square feet, but kind of the way that I see it is that I get up early, Leslie gets up early. We normally head down to the kitchen and spend our time, you know, downstairs drinking coffee, reading, you know, what we used to read the newspaper, but now of course we're all online, and, you know, kind of enjoy as the sun pops up and you start to get the first light in the kitchen. And to us, the breakfast nook being there with the pool was, you know, something that we were really looking forward to.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The public hearing is still open. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Commissioners, what's your pleasure?
I'm wondering, I forgot to ask, I was wondering if there had been any contact with neighbors directly by the owners, but I suppose we didn't get any letters.
I will reopen the public hearing and invite the applicant to return.
Thank you.
We have, you know, we talk to all the neighbors around us pretty frequently, and, you know, everybody's pretty excited about, you know, this project. The neighbor to the rear, as was commented by staff, was that he was concerned that with the accessory unit, or that 200 square foot section that's going to be taken away, it basically would open up the view into the home. And so we wanted to make sure that there's a fence built along the back, which there's definitely already a plan to do that. And, you know, we have it's a very beautiful structure along the back, so it's going to be super nice.
Okay. Thanks.
Public hearing's still open. Come forward.
My name's Rob McDonough, and I am the neighbor behind them. And it's my landlord, Bill Voorhees, that had sent in the email, I think, about his concerns about the structure that is possibly going to be removed, that unfortunately they're going to look right into my living room, and then we will look right down into their backyard. I think his concern was, is something going to go back that's going to be the same height? And that's really his concern, being that landlord at 1329 Madrona. So that's all.
Was
Thank
he
you.
open to that being a plant, like trees, or as opposed to a?
He does not care.
Oh, he doesn't care.
Yeah,
Okay.
he's excited about what's happening there.
Because my guess is,
as I.
there wouldn't be able to be a fence as tall as the structure. So my guess is the only way to get that kind of shielding would be
Shrubs.
with some plants, but I don't know.
Yeah.
So, but you're in discussion with the owners about that? or-
I am, yeah, I mean, we've been talking, but I mean, I'm okay with it. I would love it if the city would put, I don't know how tall of a fence you can put legally,
Yeah,
but the way my,
6 feet.
the way my house is, my main story is 10 feet above ground, so I'm already, yeah.
I think it's 6 feet plus 2 feet for a trellis, so it's
Right.
8 feet, yeah.
Right.
Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, so that's all.
Hello, Greg Desmond, planning consultant for the project. And I have been, along with the Blackmans, been working with the neighbors, and I've actually reached out to Mr. Voorhees regarding his concern regarding removal of the 200 square foot section of the existing accessory building. And I've let him know that we've got a very significant landscape plan that was included in the packet. I don't know if you've got an exhibit available, but we will have a very significant landscape plan and shrubs, and we're more than willing, the Blackmans and I have both made ourselves available to meet with neighbors to talk about specific landscaping concerns they might have or might request to promote screening or privacy or other items. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak before I close the public hearing? Public hearing is closed. Back to the commission.
I just have a question, maybe for Noah. Would it be an option for them to consider, since demolishing that 200 square feet and leaving the back wall as an option? I'm not saying that that's what they want to do, but that the math still works if you leave a back wall up because it's not considered floor space. I mean, just to address the concern of or ameliorate may not well fit into their overall landscape plan, but
Falls under walls and fences.
Yeah, that's an interesting question staff hasn't considered.
I mean, just because it's existing.
I absolutely, I know what you're saying. So the code actually somewhat uniquely does not provide a lot of mechanisms for fences beyond 8 feet in height.
Right.
The partial demolition question, in theory, that wall is an existing wall as you're referencing. It's an existing non-conforming situation. There's a lot of if then that, if this then that to answer your question. And so I'm not prepared to give a solid answer.
You could put a mural on it, all kinds of things.
No, I mean, it's not I don't think it's for me to redesign. And I wouldn't put it in there as anything but an option that could be considered as a solution.
No, I think it's a very creative suggestion. I just haven't done any research on it.
Well, I think the question for the commission is whether, on going to this concern in particular, is whether we're prepared to approve the plans as submitted or going to require some change. So unless there's some sentiment to require a change, I think we should move on. But I'm open to hearing what people think.
I just have a question about that. If we vote for it the way it is tonight, and then they decide to do something different, it wouldn't have to come back here or anything, would it? Or what would that mean?
Well, not to change something about the fence, and I doubt, in fact, I'm quite certain not to change anything about the landscaping, no. Any other comments? Someone prepared to make a motion?
I move that we accept staff recommendations.
Second.
And Ms. Gamero?
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Commissioner Hale,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson,
No.
Vice Chair Pont,
Yes.
Chair Hardy.
Yes. And that one's done. Thank you. That brings us to our only scheduled matter, which is 6.1. This is a particular zoning code interpretation. There's a staff report and some text. We've seen this matter before. I made some proposed changes to the text, and Director Hausch has brought it back to us. So, Director Hausch.
As was previously discussed, staff is looking for some solutions to address code discrepancies that kind of come up on a regular basis, sometimes at the staff level, sometimes at the commission level, before we have the ability to do the comprehensive zoning code update that I referenced earlier. And so one methodology for doing so is this having an official zoning code interpretation which clearly answers code questions that commonly arise. Doing it under the administrative determination procedures, allow it to be utilized. There were some questions about the legality of it. Allow it to be utilized and kind of memorialize the decision. Then this would allow staff and the commission to lean on these, clarifying the code questions, absent having these formal ordinance process to modify the code itself. Staff has brought forth a formal determination regarding a definition of the accessory use term in the zoning code for commercial uses specifically, or commercial districts specifically. Currently, accessory uses are identified in the zoning code, but they're as allowed and accessory elements to primary uses or approved uses. However, there is no definition of such. And so staff, or I should say the definition of such was limited. And so staff put together a definition which essentially identifies 15% of the business floor area or 15% of the gross revenue receipts shall be identified as an accessory use and therefore allowed to occur to an approved or conditional element of a business. There were some additional comments beyond those that were received at the previous discussion, and as Chair Hardy has identified, he made some further revisions which are identified in the description provided to the commission. One other commissioner, the vice chair, has identified that the gross revenue should be identified as annual gross revenue receipts, and also that the 15% of the business floor area at any particular time. Just to further clarify, staff is fully supportive of those suggestions. Again, the intent is to clarify what the code's saying, and so those are helpful. With that, we're looking for some feedback and support from the commission to be able to implement this zoning code interpretation, and it will be noticed similar to the administrative determination process identified in the code.
Commissioner Monette?
Yeah, it looks. I like reading it. It made my eyes feel good. But I'm wondering, what about, because it has come up in the past many years ago, accessory use that would have nothing to do with revenue. For example, having complimentary wine tasting at the back of a dress store, which was actually suggested, like, I don't know, 7 years ago, whatever, 6 years ago. So would that just be something different? Should that be mentioned here, or what?
So that's a good question. Staff has looked at this, and alcohol sales is not something that staff would see as able to be approved as an accessory use, just because they're...
Sales. This would be complimentary. There were no sales proposed. So it wouldn't fall into any metric here. There would be no way to measure. Well, the square footage would, but the other. Yeah, the square footage would be the only thing, but the
So
30%.
if that were to be the case, then yes, it would be a square footage trigger and also a review of the ABC license that would be sent to the staff.
Okay.
Staff wasn't considering alcohol, again, sales, but complimentary tastings. I guess if the commission has any feedback on that, staff would be interested in hearing it. But generally, staff was not going to consider alcohol sales as in something that could be added as an accessory use.
Okay, but would that come under someplace else anyway?
Well, we have had complimentary tastings here in town, off and on in the past. They've never,
As part of events.
as part of events, yeah, but still complimentary tastings.
Yeah.
It
But
was
they,
Cheers,
They
though.
were small. I mean, it wasn't 15% of the floor area. It was a barrel someplace.
But even if it were, I don't have any, even necessarily any objection, well, I do kind of, but I was just wondering if that should be mentioned here. That is a non-revenue producing
That's fine. We don't
accessory.
care about the revenues so long as the limit's not exceeded.
Yeah.
Okay, so long
That
as
is
the
to
square
say, the way
footage
this is drafted.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you
so
may
the-
care.
So
but-
what would count here would be the 15%.
Yeah.
The revenue would be zero.
Yeah. So
Right?
the square footage is all, would be
So,
covered.
yeah,
by that.
I don't think anybody who's a complimentary tasting is going to cover 15% of their floor area with a bar, unless that bar already
Well, if they could
exists.
wander around the store with their wine glasses, what was happening? So, but
And
I'm just remembering Cheers,
You
and
know,
I'm just
a body in the store, I don't think is something you can A, measure, or B, counts as covering your floor area.
well, okay.
I think that ends up being self-regulating in the sense that mixing free alcohol and retail probably doesn't work very well much of the time. Not sure it worked all that well at Cheers, based on the feedback I got.
But it sounds like it's covered. I mean, that's what all of us.
It is covered.
When I read this, my big question is, I don't know that we have a mechanism in the city to regulate. We don't have a 15% police that either measures square footage or measures percentage of income. And I sort of hesitate to do anything that hobbles or takes away the agility of our businesses, especially in a climate that is getting more and more difficult. And I can sympathize with the yearning to clarify on any number of fronts. But I think trying to keep in mind what I think part of our purpose should be is to build a better place to be. And when I look at our businesses mostly as locally owned, and I think we give a lot of kind of claptrap to sort of local serving without sort of empathizing very much with what it's actually like to have a business here. And I think the reality is you can't. It's a very difficult environment to exist in, and everything that I've seen, the sort of farcical discussion of local serving there aren't enough locals and there aren't enough tourists. So, I mean, I think every business endeavors to sort of seek refuge and ways to sort of leverage and get the most out of their space. I'm not sure that we've improved anything by further pigeonholing or constricting. My question on this is are we helping or are we doing damage?
So I think it's a great point, and the intent of this is absolutely to allow more flexibility for retail uses and those types of businesses. So currently, accessory uses are specified as being signs, small recycling centers, on-site storage, cottage food operations, or other structures and uses which are customarily incidental and clearly subordinate to permitted and conditional use pursuant to these chapters. My issue is if someone comes in who has a approved business or a permitted business and wants to add an element to that that may be customarily incidental and clearly subordinate, but is a conditional use per se, I have no threshold by which to draw that line and say you do not need a use permit because you are clearly subordinate, or you do because it's going to be. So staff is seeing this as kind of an extension of the temporary use permit situation, whereby a business may be able to experiment with offering some element, utilizing a portion of their business, a relatively small portion, that may be a conditional use, right? So without investing the significant time and effort to go through the planning commission process, when they don't really know if it's going to be successful. How this is envisioned is to draw a line to say you can experiment with this up to a certain percentage of your business type, and after that, if it seems beneficial and to grow, then you need to invest in the process by which you can gain ultimate approval to do this. So that's the intent.
Is it legal, or how would the, I mean, I think it's a good point. How would the revenue be measured? I mean, that would be a voluntary
or a code enforcement situation. So it's not. This is if someone came to staff and said they want to add this accessory element. We said great, and they said it's going to be less than 15% of the floor area. But then it became significant portion of their revenues, and it became a problem. This allows staff to engage with them on an enforcement level if needed to identify if they've gone beyond that.
So this would allow you guys to legally look at their books and see
if it became to that situation.
And you guys would do it, or the finance department, or who would do it?
Well, we haven't. Our code enforcement process is as such that the city manager is actually the administrative hearing officer. So code enforcement gets technical, and then those are appealed to the city council. So there's a lot of exploratory elements. It becomes very judicial, and essentially lawyers are often involved, or always involved actually from the city standpoint. So I don't want to give you an answer that says who would do the work, because it could even be a third party.
So if we prove this, though, then that there would be a way of enforcing it, but it would go to the city council probably to.
Well, currently administrative hearings, so if you're in violation of the code and you refuse to come into compliance when staff's working with you, then we schedule you for an administrative hearing before the administrative hearing officer of the city, who is currently the city manager. That decision can then be appealed to the city council.
I greatly appreciated your characterization of it, and I didn't get that from the reading of it. And I think it might be helpful to sort of, if you could insert some of that language in there that characterizes it more as a, this is a way for you to be more flexible. Because when I read it, I sort of went right to the sort of negative part of it, and really didn't catch on to any sort of kernels that this, which I think, the way you put it absolutely did. And I think it might be more useful to have some of that language in there. And maybe it's just I think if you can explain it that this 15% is more along the lines of the kind of pop-up language where we talk about kind of experimenting, trying, the agility sort of piece of it. I think it may, because I think we have to start building into the climate here, and this is part of the climate here, ways for businesses to envision success.
The way it's written, it even allows you to try something that you normally would need a conditional use permit to do, up to 15%. So it's not
Right.
It's not a small opening; it's a huge opening.
Right. No, and I see that with this discussion, and I appreciate that.
So just
I think,
maybe more on the purpose of it. That's
To
all.
go further down the line of your concern, we really have to wait for at least that piece of our zoning ordinance review, because what your concern calls into question is really both the purpose or intent and the consequence of doing what we do with conditional uses. Is this whole subject doesn't have a whole lot of traction if, although there is some restriction on how many different permitted uses you can have in the same space, but generally speaking, we're not concerned if a permitted use changes from one permitted use to another permitted use. Historically speaking, it's been more disruptive, if you will, when, and I can think of just the classic example from many years ago was a business that opened up as a flower shop, and I think that required a use permit at the time, and then it introduced coffee as a kind of accessory, and then the next thing everyone knew, it was a coffee shop with sandwiches, and there'd been no change in the use permit. So it is with the conditional uses that the whole subject of experimentation or the natural exploration becomes problematic, just because we have something invested in the notion that for that use, you've got to come get a permit, go through the public hearing process. And whether or not we're over-regulating in that regard is an open question as far as I'm concerned. But as long as we are doing it, then I think it's important to give Noah tools that enable him to explain clearly to business owners what works and doesn't work without coming to us for a process. And the use of quantifiable elements is helpful there, because if it's all essentially subjective and interpretive, that leads to a lot of inconsistency and grinding. I don't know that these numbers are the perfect numbers to use, but if we're going to make it more predictable, something like this needs to be in place. And again, I'm perfectly open to examining that bigger picture question when we get the opportunity. But for the moment, we have this zoning district construct that we have, and making it administrable, I think is important.
So staff would just add, most folks call us when they're interested in exploring these options, and this will give us the ability to say, oh, you actually can do that, but if you want to try it, and just in the interest of not bringing back a third version of this, we do have a small business owner here in town who's been very patient with me trying to get this on agenda, and who is interested in doing exactly this with a trial element of their business. And so I think they're very interested. Anyway, I just wanted to say, we've been trying to be very thoughtful of how this gets implemented, knowing that there's some interest, and also kind of hearing the direction from the council is trying to provide some flexibility for business to explore options. We're happy to discuss it further, but if the commission is comfortable, we would appreciate support for it tonight. So that way, at least one business could add an accessory element to what they currently offer and begin to explore the benefits of it.
Well, I'd be delighted to open this up to public comment. Please.
So I'm David Katz, 1771 Park Street, and also the owner of Panavino, which is on Fulton Lane. So we are one of those businesses that morphed. So we started as a catering company, which is a permitted use. Catering company for the wine industry 14 years ago. We built a kitchen on Fulton Lane. And along the way determined that that was a terrible business to be in on Fulton Lane. In part because the lease price is outrageous for catering, and in part because our business model was based on highly customized work for wineries, and although that sounds very sexy, the practical application of that for a mom and pop is that the mom and pop have to be out until 2 in the morning. Along the way, we developed a baked product, breadsticks, and we have flip-flopped our business to manufacturing. Bakery, also permitted use. So we have literally gone from one permitted use to the other as a primary use for the building. We feel very strongly that given kind of our commitment to living and working here, hiring people here, all of that, we're hoping that there's a way for us to experiment with on-site retail of what we make, where we make it, with enough other stuff to make it worth the drive. So a very limited use, and we've worked really hard with Noah for almost a year now, just going back and forth and kind of spitballing and trying to figure out how we fit into the existing code. And I feel like we won't be the only business that might benefit from something like this. I don't see, I live here. I live a block from where I built a kitchen in St. Helena. So we are, you want to talk about local serving? You're serving me if you allow us to do this. And I mean that very seriously. I mean, it's not cute. If we can't find a way to mitigate the cost of manufacturing a product in St. Helena that is not a bottle of wine, we won't be here when our kids are full grown. We're here now because we pick them up after school every day. They ride their bikes over. But for folks like us, the reality is that if we want to preserve, I think, the truest sense of local serving is a business community that reflects the community, owned by people who live in town, serving people who live in town. And so it's our hope that something like this would allow us to figure out, okay, is there a retail avenue for us? And by the way, we share the building with Acme Fine Wine and a winery tasting room. We're across the parking lot, which has more parking spaces than would ever be required for a business our size, from paintworks and a frame shop. So the texture of our neighborhood is retail, and we're the only ones who don't have retail. And so I feel like and I don't mean to suggest how you do your job or how you do your jobs, but one of the things I think that one of the things you might want to take into consideration is what's the texture of the neighborhood and the proposal. There are far more restrictions on somebody selling a bottle of wine than there are on selling a tube of breadsticks, right? And I think there's more worry. But we've said to Acme Fine Wine and Herbland Vineyards and Paintworks and all these folks, hey, you can do this. So what I'm hoping is that the texture of our neighborhood would support a small retail outlet for our place. And if we're willing to keep it to 15%, or what we're proposing is more like 12%, because we simply don't have the space. And then I think the revenue part of it is, frankly, as somebody who's been the owner of multiple businesses, it's a little hinky from an enforcement standpoint, right? It's challenging. You can cook your books to show that it's only 15%. Let's face it. I would be willing to submit to any kind of audit by an outside third party, and maybe there's the little enforcement piece to this that says, should that be necessary, it's on you, it's not on the city to pay for that, meaning you have to prove that it's 15% of your revenue. I'd be completely willing to do that. I think most business owners would, by the way. I don't think for the cost per square foot of retail space and or manufacturing space in St. Helena, I personally feel that and we thought about this a lot, we talked to Noah about it a lot, I think the potential for abusing this is actually quite small. Space is just too precious. You can't afford to mess around. And it wouldn't be worth it to us to risk some kind of enforcement action to escape the $8,500 to $10,000 it might take to actually amend a use permit to allow us to do a second use. But that $8,500 is a lot to a little company like ours. So should it become something where I want to expand and I want to, hang bigger signage and we want to expand onto Main Street, I think the natural evolution for something like this, an idea like this, is that I would be back in your lap again, asking for a use permit for a space on Main Street or moving into a permitted space on Main Street.
So am I right in understanding that the code interpretation as proposed works for your purposes?
I think it works. It worked more than adequately for my purposes.
Very good.
But I am thinking about other business owners in town. I mean, I'm not just here to serve myself. I really am here, because I think this needs to be a system. And what I do appreciate is all the thought that's going into, okay, well, if we do this, then what happens with everything else? And so I'm thinking about how does this, what's the potential for abuse here? And realistically, I really feel like it's like a Darwin thing. You won't survive if you push it to 25 or 30% doing something that was never intended for your space. Most people simply don't have that kind of extra space in St. Helena. Now, if we were to start, selling gold or something out of the back while we're baking breadsticks in front, or real estate, I would understand that would be an abuse of, the intent of the regulation. But as it is,
I'm sure that's true most of the time. But as someone with
That sounds like mafia money.
a lot of professional experience dealing with code enforcement issues, you would be amazed.
I've been on the receiving end of quite a few building projects in several states. So I didn't always make breadsticks.
For most business owners, the obvious, rational, self-interested approach is to do a reasonable job of following the rules because the alternative looks much more costly and the wear and tear isn't worth it. There is a small but potent subset of humanity who comes at it a completely different way, and that's why we need rules.
Your point's well taken. As I said, I didn't always bake breadsticks. I spent an awful lot of time running meetings like this beforehand. So I appreciate where that's coming from. I think what I'm saying is, as I read this language, which, by the way, is significantly different than a few weeks ago when we first looked at it, I feel like with a body like this and enforcement action as a possibility for the city, I believe it's adequate. Now, that sounds self-serving, and it is self-serving, but I also really think logically it's true. You can, with this, go in and measure. And if it's more than 15%, you are not in compliance. You can go in and say, you need to open your books because we believe that you're making more money than you say you're making from the 15%. You have that option with the language exactly as it's written today. So, yes, I'm hoping that you will say, this is sufficient, go turn a register on, because that's what I want to do. I also understand if you don't feel it's sufficient. But I feel, looking at it, that you have the ammunition you need to go after bad actors, the 1% who are going to try and sneak.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your input.
Is it, this is not the right time, it's not, but isn't there any way to get a sliding scale for fees, for permits? Some businesses are much, he brings up that point. Is that something that would be open for discussion here, or is that something that the city council?
The whole way in which fees are set is entirely out of the commission's hands.
Oh, okay.
So
we can't make a recommendation that the council look into it.
Oh, when there's a joint meeting where we're invited to identify subjects of concern, certainly, by correspondence, certainly.
Okay.
But, yeah.
That would be okay by correspondence.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other commission discussion or comments? Is someone ready to make a motion?
Make a motion. No, make a motion.
Move we accept the staff recommendation as modified.
I second.
Ms. Camaro?
Vice Chair Pont,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Hale,
Yes.
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
and Chair Hardy.
Yes.
Okay, that takes care of 6.1. Brings us to department reports. Director Hausch?
Just a reminder of the commission and the public that the 2040 general plan update and EIR, final EIR, are being presented to the city council 1 week from today, right in this room. And Chair Hardy has agreed to assist staff in presenting the planning commission position on that. And staff does find that to be appropriate when the commission makes recommendations to the council. We do often lean on the chair to participate in that presentation to ensure the commission's direction is clearly communicated, and Chair Hardy has agreed to attend that meeting. And
what's more, I have promised to be very brief.
Adopt this sucker. Yeah.
I say yay. I'm so glad. That's good. Finally.
And that was our only report, so we're now at the agenda forecast item, which, as you will recall, just directs our attention to a link. That brings me to my favorite part of the meeting, which is adjourned. Yow.